Take 107. Hey Quad Staters, it's Victoria Patty from the Blacksmither Radio Podcast. The organizers of this event asked me to put together a little bit of a documentary bit on the beginnings of the Quadstate Round-Ups 40 years ago, 1977. I was able to talk to a few of the attendees of the very first Quadstate Round-Up, and they eventually became demonstrators in the following years. You're going to hear from Larry Wood, Joe Boniface, Michael Bendalee, Bruce Washington, and Barry Wheeler. So in 1977, an influential and very generous man, Emmet Studebaker, decided to host a blacksmith meet on his Studebaker homestead in Tip City, Ohio. Now, Emmet wasn't a professional blacksmith himself, but he had the blacksmith bug. Let's listen to Larry Wood's explanation of who Emmet was.
Emmet Studebaker was a doer. Whatever Emmet became involved in, he did with gusto and enthusiasm. No matter if it was family or hobbies, he applied himself to the fullest. So it was with blacksmithing. Emmet's interest in blacksmithing stemmed from his deep-seated feeling of family and the need to recognize his roots. Thus, in 1970, the John Studebaker Blacksmith Shop was erected at the Studebaker homestead. I was working at Emmet's company, Process Equipment, at the time, and after work he and I would head for the blacksmith shop with Alex Beeler's book, The Art of Blacksmithing, in hand. We would struggle to shape metal into usable objects. Over the months, our skills began to improve. From Emmet's correspondence, many contacts were made with others interested in blacksmithing. Through this correspondence, Emmet became aware of a group of men that was going to meet in Lumpkin, Georgia, in hopes of keeping blacksmithing alive. With this group of men, Emmet included the national organization ABANA, Artist Blacksmiths Association of North America, was born. Emmet was instrumental in the initial growth and development of ABANA, in the limelight and behind the scenes. His facilities at the Studebaker homestead were used extensively for get-togethers, many conferences, and board meetings. Blacksmithing was being revived. At the meetings and correspondence held at the homestead, Emmet suggested that some kind of training or teaching program would help us in this resurgence. Emmet's vast accumulation of blacksmith tools would soon be put to use. We set up 4 forging stations in the shooting range and 4 in the wagon shed. Bob Zeller and myself began teaching, more like guiding this first group in the basics of forging metal. Emmet, Bob, and myself talked often of the need for a local organization, as we had a strong interest in this area. Emmet was already active in our state organization and held meetings and conferences for this organization at the homestead. We pulled the money earned from teaching, and after some initial meetings, SOFA Southern Ohio Forge and Anvil was formed. Emmet generously donated use of the Studebaker homestead for monthly meetings and the annual Quadstate Blacksmith Round-Up.
And this is Joe Boniface's recollection of Emmet.
He was just very much interested in getting them to share their information with everybody. And he was incredible. He just was an individual who was so interested in longevity of the craft, because back then there wasn't any information to speak of in book form. There was The Art of the Blacksmith by Alex Beeler and a couple others. He had a dry sense of humor. He was just very giving with what he had as far as his knowledge and also his facilities. I mean, when you think about it, to allow 100 strangers to come onto your property, you have no idea where they're from, what their backgrounds are, and he, welcomed them with open arms and encouraged it.
Now let's hear about the very first Quadstate Round-Up in 1977.
The first formal Quadstate Round-Up in 77, we had Dimitri Garikaris and Eric Mobius and Francis Whitaker.
What else can you guys tell us about the early beginnings of Quadstate and SOFA?
Yeah, well, there were good, there was a old standby Francis Whitaker. Tom Bredlow was there. Dimitri Garikaris, who was unbelievable.
I attended in 1977, which was the one considered to be the first Quadstate, as there were attendees from 4 states, and I remember Emmert stating that specifically, that he was excited that he'd managed to get people to attend his blacksmith roundup, as he referred to them, from 4 states, which, at that time, that was a really huge deal. But I attended the first one, and I've only missed one since then, and that was in 1986, because our son was born like the next day, and it probably wasn't a good idea for me to be gone that weekend.
As far as one coming to mind that was more impressive than the other, I guess I would have to say the first one, when it was so new to us, and it was so interesting, all the things that could be done. And it was with Francis Whitaker, when he demonstrated, especially at that first one, he presented the information in a very thorough way, and it was exciting.
I don't know how many people were there. There might have been close to 100. I'm not sure. But we all just pulled up, and most people tent camped or slept in vans right next to the shops there. And Emmert was very, very gracious and very generous in letting people do that. There was absolutely no benefit to him other than he got to share his love for the craft. But the main thing of the first blacksmith conference was that people were so excited to be there, and it was a very universal thing that people were excited to go there and share what they knew. It just was very fresh to everybody, even the demonstrators, even particularly with Francis, who at that time, I suppose he'd already been blacksmithing for probably 40 years by then. He was still very excited by what he was doing. That gets attention, and it really got mine. I just found it very fascinating.
I think it was the first conference, I don't remember, but I believe the first conference, Emmert had actually set up. Now, I told you that they had a big factory company on his property, which was all part of this whole, I'm going to call it an estate. Anyway, they had a cafeteria in there, and so we got tickets color-coded, and he orchestrated so that we would all go in and be able to eat in different time frames, so everybody was taken care of. I mean, that's the way Emmert was.
Now we're going to hear about some following Quadstate Roundups from the early days. Now, I heard that there were other games that Emmert put together for, like, the children or the spouses.
What was it, the skillet throwing contest?
The skillet.
Talk about sexes. Jeez and peasy. You couldn't get away with that today.
They had a rolling pin throwing contest where the girls and the wives could throw rolling pins. I mean, it really was kind of a throwback, literally and figuratively, to activities that might have happened in the past.
Oh, yeah, they always did try to have things to do for spouses. Oh, there were silly things. They had bowling pin toss.
They also had an anvil throwing contest, which I think Bruce Washington maybe won, but how far they threw it, I don't know. Didn't go very far, needless to say.
I don't know what year it was, but I need to get this on record. I have witnesses, and some people remember this, but I won both classes of the anvil throwing contest at SOFA one year.
Really?
The stupid class and the stupider class.
Stupid class and the stupider class. One was like an 80-pound anvil, and the other one was 300 pounds.
300 pounds? You chuck that thing?
I think so.
And he has back problems to this day.
Maybe, maybe it was a 200. I don't know how big it was, but it was a big anvil, and nobody could throw it very far. In fact, most people couldn't lift it. So
The last time he told it was only 250 pounds. You get my drift here?
Do you know when the forging competitions all started?
They did start very early on. I remember one of the first ones was, and it had to have been the first or second year, possibly was the first year. But the one I remember, the earliest one I remember was the competition was to forge weld 3 chain links together.
Wow.
It was crazy. The different ways people came up with doing it, you know,
Yeah.
and it was the craziest stuff, and most of it didn't work, but it was very entertaining. And then, of course, then on Sunday morning, then Francis showed everybody how you're really supposed to do it.
I want to tell a story about Dimitri and Barry. Barry, many, many years ago, built a tiny, as in 8-inch tall power hammer modeled after a little giant.
Yeah.
And I say modeled after. It wasn't a replica, but it worked.
Run with a sewing machine with it.
Ran with a sewing machine motor with a little belt, and it was exquisite. And Dmitri Garakaris was fascinated by this thing, and I will never forget, and I wish I had photographs of this. The power hammer was sitting on a picnic table, and Dmitri Garakaris took his shoes off and put his foot up on the table and operated the hammer with his big toe, foot pedal, and was forging a pair of tongs, or a half a pair of tongs, out of a piece of copper wire on this little tiny. Dimitri is a big guy, no matter how you cut it. You know, here's this little tiny power hammer. He just loved it. He thought that was the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Emmert died on March 7th in the year 2000, but his legacy lives on within this community. To everyone out there, thank you for coming to celebrate the 40th anniversary of this incredible conference. Even though we are of many different ages and we have all different kinds of jobs and interests, it is certain that we have 2 things in common: the admiration for the blacksmith craft and for a man that made all this possible many years ago. He saw the opportunity for a learning environment and a supportive community. So join me in giving Emmert and all the many devoted volunteers a round of applause and a big thank you. Now go out there and have the best damn Quad State Roundup in history. Woo!